Hello friends, this is Govan here. Now this is probably a pretty bold statement to make. It's just simply my understanding at this point in time and what I've distilled down and out of everything I've learned about how the world works. Whether or not it's accurate is beside the point. It's just getting a message out there which, while it might not be the whole scope of the problems that are occurring in the world, it's essentially my understanding of the real core issue of what's causing, the problems we hear about on a regular basis. And it comes down to, obviously, a lot of people point their fingers at all sorts of things, but generally it's pointed towards people in charge who are leading and guiding, large populations of people to do certain things. And while the power structure and way I think the world works in and of itself is not inherently bad, because how else do you have people and society function is you have leaders and you have people that kind of follow. I don't think of the leader and follower type dynamic as inherently bad. It's you look anywhere, whether it's a club, school, work environment, all these things have someone in charge with people under them that do their guidance. It doesn't mean that one spot is better than the other. What comes out of that as a problem is when there's obviously corruption, bad reasoning for what it is the leader's asking people to do, and a whole host of other things. One of the major problems that as cultures or as a global society we woke up to, or at least developed society we woke up to during our history, was obviously through the development of democracy in Greece, and that spread outwards. And this was a huge improvement on monarchy-based systems, any kind of system where there was a ruling class that really forbade any type of person who wasn't from a specific bloodline to be in charge. People are going to say, that still exists today, and it certainly does in certain ways. But the monarch system, when democracy started to come in, really improved that. You look at any improvements, we don't have random beheadings just because someone at the top disagrees with your viewpoint. So we've made huge progress. Let's acknowledge that. But with the advance of technology, the problems that do still exist have been magnified and have caused humanity to really take its toll on the planet. And we're obviously, many people are aware of this, preaching to the choir, but we're on the precipice of some really dangerous things with nuclear radiation problems from the way our energy systems are set up, the suppression of alternative energy fuel sources that prevents that from becoming the main thing. Overconsumption of fossil fuels, that's an obvious one. All these things are maintained and not brought to light because, while we've moved towards secularism, which still needs to advance because there's still a lot of religious influence in politics, and that's to varying degrees depending on what country in the Western world you're looking at. But the next big hurdle, and it's questionable whether we're going to be able to do it in time. I always have a positive outlook on things. I try to, and I believe it's possible, but we need to get corporations out of government. This is the core problem, I think, that faces our species, and that is that, while we're still extricating secularism from the powers that direct and guide our countries in the developed world, and even in the undeveloped world, as those countries become more developed, the next big thing is obviously the political influence. So what companies are influencing politics? You look at any government and the way people get elected in the developed democratic countries is that there's all sorts of corporations and entities that contribute money to their race for public office, And that ends up being that once they're in office, they have to, listen to those groups that funded their parties to then put legislation into place that favors those companies. And time again, we see people making those changes to policies and all sorts of things. That is counter to the good of the environment, that is counter to the good of the average person, that erodes our personal freedoms and liberties of people. And what frustrates me of all is actually allows for some religious things to creep back in to Western culture. So we work so hard to extricate a lot of influence from these things, and once again we've made incredible progress to become a secular society, but we still see virtually every major religion having its influence in different ways. I'm not going to start listing these off because it can get a little sketchy and people will start throwing names out there, but you do any amount of research into this thing, the big offenders, the major ones being probably in Western culture, Judaism and Christianity more so than Islam. But all in all, these intolerant policies are extremely harmful, and they push ideas that are, once again, not for the good of the people, not for the good of the environment, and those are the two big issues we face. Is secularism. We've moved towards it, but we still need to do more of it, and the big one being big corps, and that does include unions and other things. Really, the only people that should have influence on the government are the people, not corporations. Corporations are people too, is the common thing people throw out there. But no, we can't really totally agree with that, because even though they might be, in some weird legal terms, considered people, they're corporations that have the same root word as body, but their motivation is pure profit. And when you have a company that has investors, and it's the company's role to keep making those investors money, it reaches a point where if we're talking about public companies, it keeps progressing, and it's going to sacrifice good ethics and morals that any individual person would have and wouldn't go over and cross. And it's going to sacrifice those in favor of making the investors more money. So at that point, it's no longer just one person making a decision, because a lot of people think of it as there's a corporation, there's one guy or maybe a board of people at the top who are making these decisions, and they're just completely narcissistic. And by all means, there's definitely narcissistic psychopaths at the top of a lot of these companies, but the major thing causing these companies to do such bad things is that when investors come in and these companies go public, or they are public, they need to continually please those people. So even if there is some wonderful, compassionate person at the top of the company, they're going to be motivated to do bad things and make bad policies on the environment and the general populace, because they are pleasing and need to please the investors in that company. So I'm still branching off and just rambling on here, so that essentially wraps up the problems I think are the number one thing facing humanity at the moment. And that is the root cause of a lot of these other problems, which are seriously horrendous. Poverty, world hunger, all sorts of environmental destruction. These are all horrible things, but they can all trace a root to this main problem. And if we start to change that, we'll start to see improvements in these other things. I'll just quickly say, and I'll link to something that's going on in the US. It would be great to see this happening in other countries too, is the Wolf Pack, which is being sponsored and promoted as a way of getting corporate money out of political campaigns. I think that's wonderful. I'll throw a link to it below. So if this gathers enough momentum, it's going to actually create some change. We're already seeing some good developments with it from what I've seen. So while I live in Canada, it is wonderful to see that going on in the US, which definitely has a lot bigger problems with corporate influence on politics than perhaps any other country. So with that, I'll talk to you guys next time.